Today's video is brought to you in part by the Corsair One Pro gaming system. Get your game on. Okay, are you guys ready for a challenge? How about overclocking with the GTX 1080 Founders Edition versus the RX Vega 64, but this time the liquid cooled edition of the Vega and the Founders Edition, which is an air cooled card, but crazy overclocking. We tested like 28 games, all overclocked, and so those are the results we're gonna be bringing you guys today. Now, we used Wattman for all of the AMD overclocking, and then we used Afterburner from MSI for all the stuff on the GTX 1080 side of things. So for those guys wondering, what do we use to do the overclocking? Well, those were the two tools that we used. But we've got a whole lot of games, and I think at the end of the day, you guys are gonna look at the results and go, wow, I think this is actually pretty interesting, because really, the results at the end of the day are very, very interesting. It's a very, very swap off thing between the two cards. I mean, I think you guys will totally agree that the things that kind of balance out between them make them in a way pretty equal. You know, we'll just jump right in first. Let's first talk about the test system, the drivers we used, then let's get in there and let's check out those benchmarks. So the parts that we use in the test bench that you're seeing in today's video consisted of an Intel Core i7 6700K at 4.0 gigahertz, which turbos to 4.6 gigahertz. Now this was done on an ASRock Z170 motherboard, 16 gigabytes of HyperX DDR4 at 3333 megahertz. The driver that we used for the GTX 1080 was the WHQL 385.41. And for the Vega 64, we used the 17.82 driver. All results in today's testing show average frame rates, but we also include the minimum frame rates as well. All right, gamers, before we jump in and conclude the video, let's check out a word from today's sponsor, Corsair. The Corsair One Pro is the perfect compact gaming PC, standing at just under 15 inches tall with a depth of 7.7 inches. It features a liquid-cooled GTX 1080 Ti, so you know you're going to get amazing 4K graphics. It also has a liquid-cooled i7 CPU on a mini ITX motherboard, and you can get up to 32 gigabytes of DDR4 DRAM memory with a 480 gigabyte M2 SSD, which is 5 times faster than a SATA SSD. The One Pro also supports up to two 2.5-inch drives at up to 2 terabytes, and best of all, it's VR ready with HDMI and USB ports right in the front. And you also get 3 USB 3.0 ports, a USB 3.1 Type-C port. The system also comes pre-installed with Windows 10, so you can be up and going immediately. Check one out today. All right, so that's the Corsair One Pro. Now let's check out those benchmarks. Now, as far as the overclocking went on the Vega 64, its overall average was 1716 megahertz. But the memory clocks from the overclocking were pretty nice, from 945 megahertz to 1080 megahertz, and the temperatures never reached over 70 Celsius even under full load. Now, the overclocking results of the GTX 1080 were pretty nice. Now, as far as the GPU boost goes, we got 1935 megahertz, and the memory wasn't bad either. When we added 375 megahertz, we were able to achieve a final stable memory clock of 5,375 megahertz. And even though the GTX 1080 did run a little hotter than the Vega 64, and obviously this should actually be expected since it's an air-cooled card, it still remained relatively cool in the mid-70s Cs throughout all of our testing. Okay, now don't throw rocks at me because I'm just bringing you guys the information. One thing I want to say, I know a lot of people leave comments that are always like, hey, you need to disable this and disable that when you do the AMD card. I'm gonna be honest with you, maybe that might be in some people's book, an evener way to do stuff, but I don't really feel so. I'd have to really go back and retest everything and turn all those same features off on the NVIDIA card. So for turning off all those extra things, you guys are saying, hey man, don't test an AMD card with this thing. I guess in the future I'll experiment with that. But honestly, I want my game to look the best. So I'm using the best. I want to have the best anti-aliasing and all that stuff when I'm watching games. And to me, disabling that stuff, it's kind of, making the card not all it can be. Now, obviously, when you're doing 4K testing, a lot of that alien stuff really doesn't mean jack shit because you got such a huge resolution. But at 1080 and 1440, oh, don't tell me that anti-aliasing stuff doesn't help, because it hell sure does. It gets rid of all those jaggies and just makes your game look a lot smoother when you're going through it. So, with all those tests and all those things, at the end of the day, we all know that right now, getting a hold of a water-cooled RX Vega 64 is still like picking through a haystack and trying to find that needle. Prices are slowly starting to get there, so right off the bat, we know that that card is a lot more expensive. Now, one thing that's kind of nifty, though, is that even with all that power that we had to give that AMD card to reach those results, it still ran really cool. And that's kind of a really nice thing, and it actually isn't that loud either. So in those respects, it's really nice. But at the end of the day, overall, the $549, the GTX 1080 Founders Edition, it actually does win in the overclocking department between these two cards right now. Now, in the future, obviously, new drivers, things change. We'll go back to it, and those things, might change. But as you guys can see right now, obviously, the memory, you can clock the shit out of it. You apply that power on the AMD card, but you're still getting almost those same kind of numbers on the NVIDIA card without having to, increase all that voltage up. So for some people out there, increasing the voltage and all that, you might want to think about that because it does lower the lifespan of your card. So, if you really are a person and overclocking is all that you're interested in, well, you guys can see the card really doesn't, it doesn't overclock, super widely. It does okay, but it's not great. Hopefully in the future, the AMD RX 64 and the 56 will both do better. But for right now, you guys can see from the test, the FE, man, it's just winning, and that's just the way it is. Those are the numbers. Like always, I want to see your guys' comments down below. I love you guys, and thanks for watching the channel. Me, Bud the Dog, and G, we'll see you guys back on the channel for more tech tomorrow. Peace.